Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Pediatric Grand Rounds. Thanks for being here, both in the room and for those of you who are on WebEx. Just for a reminder, for the usual reminder from me, if you're on WebEx, please make sure you're muted. And also, if you have questions or comments at any time during the presentation, you can chat them into the chat with everyone box. I will be watching the chat, and I'll be able to ask your question at the end of the presentation. And just disclosure from the planners for Grand Rounds, we have no relevant financial relationships to disclose. And now I will introduce our wonderful speaker for today, Dr. Sangeeta Hingorani, who is a professor of pediatrics in the Division of Nephrology. She has been here at Children's for 30 years, starting as an intern in 1993. So congratulations, that's a big deal. She is a physician scientist, and her research interests include kidney injury after a hematopoietic cell transplant, long-term kidney outcomes in children born prematurely, and food insecurity and impact on kidney health. We're so excited to hear about her trip and sabbatical and her work, so welcome, Dr. Hingorani. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction and for inviting me to speak here today. I actually am amazed that I've avoided speaking at Grand Rounds these past 20 years when I started as faculty, but I'm happy to be here today. And I'm not sure if my friends and colleagues in Madrid are able to log on, pero if you are here, hola, ¿qué tal? Los extraño a todos y espero que os guste la charla. Bueno, vamos a empezar. So the title of my talk is Madrid es no tener nada y tenerlo todo. And I saw this on the window in one of the small stores in my neighborhood, and what it literally means is in Madrid you can have nothing and have everything. And I went to Madrid alone with really not a lot of expectations or a set agenda, and I found more than I could have imagined. I say I arrived alone, but I really arrived with COVID, and very quickly learned of the generosity of the Spanish people and the rapidity of their food delivery system. It was great. So I have no disclosures. So a brief outline, I just want to give you some basic information about the sabbatical process. When I mentioned to some people that I was taking a sabbatical, I was met with, "We don't have sabbaticals. They don't exist." I said, "Well, I'm taking one." I will share with you the goals of my sabbatical, and there are departmental goals as well, but my own goals, some of the research projects that we started there, and some of my own personal projects and things I wanted to work out. And throughout the talk will be some views of Madrid that I explored on foot. So starting with this picture at the right, this was just around the corner from the apartment that I lived in. And at the bottom is Casa Alberto. And Casa Alberto is this great little place with wonderful tapas and vermouth on tap. And that's a big thing in Madrid. And Tito, the bartender, always welcomed you with a warm smile and was willing to speak with me and allow me to practice my Spanish. So I enjoyed the place. So I thought we should start with a definition of sabbatical. So a sabbatical is defined as a period of leave that is granted to a university teacher or other worker for study or travel. And you can use this time as you wish, whether it's for rest, learning new skills, writing, or inner work. And I wanted to use it for all of those things. And I found that the inner work was a lot easier to do after a glass or two of sangria. And I will let you know that in Madrid, the Madrileños do not drink sangria. They drink tinto de verano, which is very different. So the sangria is only for the tourists. So I had to quickly let that go because I wanted to be living in Madrid, not as a tourist. So there are some requirements for your sabbatical. You have to be on faculty for 7 years and promoted to associate professor. And for every 7 years of service, you're entitled to up to 1 year of sabbatical leave. I chose to take 6 months. I worried that if I took a year, I wouldn't come back. But you are required after your sabbatical to then stay on for an additional year at most. Applications are due December 1st for the next academic year, and your dates of leave need to coincide with the UW academic quarters, but you can span multiple quarters. You need approval from both the department chair, Dr. Leslie Walker Harding, as well as the provost of the University of Washington. Whoops. Okay. Next slide. There we go. So there is a formal UW application, actually. That is the application for sabbatical leave, and it is one page and very simple to fill out. But what you do need to do to get approval is write a letter discussing in detail the purpose of your leave. You want to include any information about the projects you may be doing, research projects, a plan and timeline for completion of those projects, and really give details about who you're going to be working with, whether it's an institution, a foundation, or a person, what you're going to be doing, and where you're going to be doing it. If you have any funding available to cover your salary during the time of your sabbatical, you want to include this in that letter of intent that is addressed to, again, Dr. Leslie Walker Harding, our department chair, and the executive committee of the department. So if you have funding on grants and you're able to do work on those grants while you're away on sabbatical, or you have any FTE that you can use to support your salary, include that in the letter. So I'm co-director of the Fellows College, which gave me 0.1 FTE, which I was able to apply to use during my sabbatical time. You need a CV in the UW School of Medicine format, and all this letter is sent to our department chair, and then what she will do once it's approved, she and her team will put it together along with a letter of support and shepherd it to the provost for final approval. And Christina Woodruff is a great resource for all of this information. So a little bit more about funding. There is, within the Department of Pediatrics, there is an endowment for research sabbaticals that might be able to provide some salary support. And I believe that this was started during the tenure of Dr. Stapleton when he was department chair. Again, if you have some grant support and you can continue work on that grant, you can apply that FTE to the salary support while you're away on sabbatical. If you happen to have an endowed chair, you can use one endowment per sabbatical. And if by chance there are any division resources available that you can apply towards FTE and salary support, include that in that letter as well. So the goals of the sabbatical are going to vary by individual, but the UW goal as it's written is that this professional leave with pay is to increase the scholarship and professional development of members of the faculty. And I had my own goals, clearly, both professional and personal goals. I started my research career studying the kidney injury that occurs after bone marrow transplant or hematopoietic cell transplant, and I'm just going to refer to that as transplant because it's a mouthful. And I wanted to continue this work. I'd also started about 7 or so years ago working in food insecurity and worked with a group of people to start our food pantry here. And I wanted to do more. I wanted to work and learn about what was happening in the community and what organizations were doing to address this. I wanted to become fluent in Spanish. I can speak Spanish, so I had decided that I wanted to go to Madrid. And I chose Madrid because I could speak the language, and I happened to know Dr. Rafael Duarte, who is the head of the bone marrow transplant and hematology division at a hospital in Madrid, Majadahonda. And we had worked together on a retrospective study in the bone marrow transplant population, and he had invited me to speak at a couple of European bone marrow transplant meetings, and so I knew him, we had met. I reached out to him, and after a couple of email conversations and a few Zoom calls, he was gracious enough to invite me to spend time with him and his colleagues and his division in Madrid. The other thing that I realized in my work here, and I've been here a long time, 20 years on faculty, 30 years when I started, and I was starting to feel that I needed to change. I was feeling disconnected in a way from people, from my work, and I felt like I wasn't I wasn't getting the same joy out of what I was doing from seeing patients, from research, and I just needed to change, I thought, the environment that I was in. And I don't think I was alone in feeling this way. I think we had talked a lot about burnout and just needed some time to step away. So we'll start this sabbatical talking about my professional journey. Another thing that I realized I needed to gain some perspective. Perspective on my career, perspective on just what I was doing, where I wanted to go, and what more I could do. And I was questioning, had I reached that proverbial glass ceiling here at Children's? Could I do the things I wanted to do? Could I continue to grow here in the ways I thought I wanted to do? And so I used part of my time away to really explore that as well. And this is from the Dali Museum. This is the kind of the main entranceway into the Dali Museum, which is in Girona, just outside of Girona. And if you have the opportunity to go, I recommend it. It is amazing, absolutely incredible. And that center picture, we're talking about perspective. I don't know if you can see. Is there a pointer? Can you? Because it's not showing up. Okay, well, oh, sorry. Anyway. Okay, so this painting that you see that looks like Abraham Lincoln in the center, depending on where you stand in that room, it is a nude portrait of his wife, Gala. So you can't capture that when you're trying to take a picture of it, no matter where you stand. I will be looking at Gala, but the picture will look like Abraham Lincoln. So it really, the whole museum really plays with your perspective and how you see things and what you see and how angles. And that's what I needed. I needed a different perspective. So this just spoke to me. So I started my sabbatical in January. I decided again to take 6 months, and I decided to focus on the kidney injury after bone marrow transplant and my work in food insecurity. And I spent January and February working on 2 grants that I submitted before leaving, and one of them was a grant that an NIH had put out a request for applications where they wanted to combine a community organization with an investigator or research institute to address the structural issues that lead to health inequities and lead to the disparities in the health outcomes. And so I had been part of an organization that was called Food is Medicine, and they wanted to build a coalition in Washington and Oregon to try and get food covered by insurance companies. And through that, I met this incredible woman named Adasha Turner, who started a nonprofit called Modest Family Solutions. And she is a force to be reckoned with. She has been feeding her community throughout the pandemic from food she grows in her garden, in her backyard, as well as this hydroponic unit that sits in a shipping container in her backyard as well. And so I met her, and we worked to put this grant together. She also feeds her community 2 or 3 times a week by preparing meals for them, and she uses kitchens that are available in churches. So here I spent a day learning how to cook Iraqi meals, and we prepared Iraqi dishes, and we prepared about 50 meals for Iraqi refugees that were in Everett. So just a little bit more about Adasha and her nonprofit. She is an agroecology and food justice person. She has distributed over 1 million pounds of fresh produce. She is able to galvanize a group of people to go out to farms when they have harvested the food that they can, and there's leftover food. She galvanizes people, goes and harvests that food, puts it in trucks and delivers it to people in need. She also has open markets where she gives away this food for free. So we worked on this grant, and our project and our goal was to put these hydroponic units into communities that were designated as food deserts. And Skyway is one of those communities that she had been working in, and we decided we wanted to put this shipping container, put this urban farm into this community, build out a community kitchen so that we could teach people how to grow food and then prepare it in a healthy but culturally appropriate way. And hydroponic growing grows vegetables and fruits without soil. It uses water. There is a unit inside on the wall that adds essential nutrients at various time points, make sure that pH is balanced. You can grow 365 days a year, use very little water, and it's really a remarkable system that I was unaware of, but it's really not new. The first description of this was published in Nature in 1938. And the gentleman there, Gerke, was able to grow about 17 pounds of fruit per plant, and he harvested nearly a ton of tomatoes in just 10 square feet. That grant was unfortunately not funded, but we haven't given up. I believe in the work, really want to do this work, and so we're looking for alternative funding sources. So if anybody knows of anyone that wants to invest, please let me know. And the second part of my sabbatical, 4 months, I was going to spend in Madrid working on and continuing my research in the kidney injury that occurs after hematopoietic cell transplant. And as you can see, it is not a simple process. It is quite complex. The series of insults and complications that can lead to this kidney injury. And I have been trying and working for 20 years to try and demonstrate that the kidney is involved and a target organ of graft versus host disease. And for those of you who know me, yes, this is what I've been doing and hitting my head against the wall sometimes to try and demonstrate this, but also to understand if it's not a target organ, then why is it protected? So I have been a strong proponent and advocate for trying to biopsy these patients with some success. And I thought maybe in Spain I would have a new perspective on this research, and maybe I could convince them perhaps to biopsy some of their patients, and we could build this international collaboration. They did do a couple of biopsies while I was there, so perhaps that will continue. I was also told that prior to my arrival, this review article was required reading for all of the residents and faculty in the division, so their first introduction to me, for better or worse. So I'm going to tell you about my research as well and just the time there. So on that right picture, that panel, that is the view outside my window. And I was fortunate enough to find this apartment in Madrid in a neighborhood called Las Letras, which was somewhat touristy, but I really didn't feel like a tourist. I really appreciated the community in the neighborhood. And those of you that know me know that I like to have control over things. I realized that I need to let go of that, and that was another thing I wanted to work on. My twins are in college, and they're sophomores, and I am not a fan of fraternities. I apologize, but I'm not. Of course, my sons decide to join a fraternity, much to my dismay, much to family conversations about all the reasons they shouldn't do this. But they did. And the one good thing that came out of that was that they met a woman whose family just happens to own 2 apartments in Madrid. So I connected with this woman's mother. We got along. She sold me on her neighborhood, gave me a great deal on this 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor, and I was set. The only good thing so far that I have found from that fraternity. Again, and on the other picture is one of the major plazas in Spain, Plaza Santa Ana, which was a wonderful place to just sit out and people watch, have coffee or sangria, and really just enjoy the day and the sunshine. Of course, being from Seattle, I had to find a coffee shop. And this one also was around the corner, Feliz Coffee. The owner there, whose name is Sace, the number 6, I asked multiple times, was lovely, and he had been in New York, so he could speak English. Again, he would allow me to practice my Spanish with him so I could improve. The only bad thing about this coffee shop is it wasn't open at 7 a.m. when I was starting my day of work. So on my days when I wasn't there, I was able to enjoy some coffee from him. So I'm going to share with you a typical work day of mine in Madrid and walk you through what we do. So this is Plaza del Sol, and I would start my days in the morning, as that clock says, about 7:15. This was 5 minutes from my apartment, and I would walk about 2 miles to Moncloa, and that's where I would meet one of my colleagues who would give me a ride to the hospital, which was about 15 or 20 minutes outside of Madrid. If I took the bus, it was about 45 minutes outside of Madrid. But I loved the mornings in Madrid. The city is just waking up, it's quiet, there's a tranquility. You'll see a few people that are out cleaning their cafe windows or just in front of their shops. And it was really a magical time for me each morning. These are some places that I would pass along the way. On the afternoon walk home, there were a lot more people in the streets and out and about doing things. On the right is Plaza España, which is one of the major plazas actually in Madrid that has been changed a lot since I was there in 1987. They've added a lot more green spaces, they've added parks. If you wander through there on the other side, there's a park where it's really lovely to watch the sunset. And I would walk by these each morning and each afternoon. This is the main entrance to the hospital, Puerta de Hierro in Majadahonda, where I spent my time. I was embedded within the adult bone marrow transplant team, and that's where I was working and doing my research as well as clinical work. So this hospital was established in 1964. It is a public hospital that serves about 450,000 people. No one pays the bill. There are 714 faculty members, about 450 residents, and they have 40 accredited subspecialty training programs. So it is a teaching hospital that's associated with a medical school, and their training is different there. So what happens if you decide you want to do a subspecialty, you spend 1 year in internal medicine in the adult world, and that is divided between the emergency room, urgent care, inpatient and outpatient clinics. And so then you move on to your subspecialty, and you will spend 3 years either in hematology and bone marrow transplant or in oncology. So it's separate. So when I was there, what I realized is that they don't have that same level of comfort that we might have with managing, hypertension or volume overload, diuretics, as we might have because we spend 3 years first in pediatrics and then go on to do a subspecialty. And it was great for me because I felt like I could contribute clinically, since I'm not a transplant physician, in those areas of volume and diuretics and how to manage acute kidney injury. And I felt comfortable doing that mainly because, adults are really just big children with more life experience. So I didn't have a problem contributing. I spent time in the inpatient and outpatient clinics, and a typical day is from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Imagine, 8 to 3. It's lovely. Sign out is at 3. You go home. You don't go home. You have a nice lunch that starts with a glass of wine, and lunches there are not 30 minutes in front of your computer screen. When you have lunch with a colleague, it's out. It's a 2-hour experience. And then you go home, take a nap, or do whatever else you need to do for the evening. So I chose to work in the hospital 3 days a week and to use the other 2 days for my personal growth and my personal time. We had meetings every morning at 8:15 to discuss. On Mondays, we discussed the patients that had been admitted in the hospital. Other days, we would discuss transplant patients in various stages of workup and issues that needed to be resolved to bring them to transplant. And then they were just starting their CAR T-cell therapy. So one morning was dedicated to discussing those protocols. After the morning meeting, which often went till about 9, many went to the cafeteria that you can see here to have coffee and breakfast and to just chit-chat before they went about their way and separated for the day. And a typical breakfast there is toast, pan tostada. It's toasted bread with some olive oil and grated tomato on top, a little salt and pepper. Lovely, very simple, but great. And it was really nice to start your morning building that, starting with connection before we separated. I went to the outpatient clinics on Mondays and Thursdays, and then I did inpatient team rounds with Dr. Duarte every Wednesday. Everything's in Spanish, and I appreciated that because it helped improve my fluency. So this is just a typical outpatient consult room. Nothing really very special, but the physician sits on one side, the patients are on the other, and they type out the note as they're during the visit, print out when they're done with the visit, and any labs that need to be ordered, and the patient is handed everything before they leave the office. I realized that when I was sitting there, we would review the labs before we saw each patient, and I wanted to know what the creatinine was, and when they came in, I wanted to know what the blood pressure was and what their weight was doing, and they didn't have any of that. They didn't check blood pressure before, they didn't really get a weight. And so I was trying to ask if there was a way we could make this happen, and trying to be helpful, I went and found the blood pressure monitors and started checking on the patients in the room. I was like, this is one thing I can do, I can help. And so they are hopefully going to work out a process where they can get the blood pressures checked, because many of these patients after transplant, as many of you may know, are hypertensive. And they are on blood pressure medications, and their patients were on multiple blood pressure medications. So to not have a blood pressure was a little unsettling for me. And then in my desire to be helpful, as Carlos, Dr. Carlos de Miguel, who is a junior faculty member and on the right looking at a blood smear of a patient in clinic, printing out, he had run out of toner in his printer. So I thought that I would go help him and see if I could find toner. And he said, go ask for conchi. So I don't know the Spanish word for toner, so I thought it was conchi. So I walk out and I'm like, I need conchi, and I'm trying to explain that Carlos needs conchi, the printer's out of toner, where can I find conchi? And in my Spanish and English, then I'm starting to point at a printer and saying conchi, and the people are looking at me like I'm crazy. So finally, one person's like, she says, what? And I said, conchi for the printer. She holds my hand, she walks me across the hall, and across the hall, in the nursing station, she introduces me to a woman named Conchi. Conchi is the name of the nurse who could help me find the toner. It is not the word for toner. And I think to this day, I still don't know the Spanish word for toner, so I'm too embarrassed to ask. So, I did go over there to do work and to do research, and I really wanted to answer and do research that was beneficial to the people there, and wanted them to determine the questions that they really wanted to answer. So we started our discussion. Those two pictures on the right are from Malaga. Once I was out of quarantine, the first day I went to the hospital and met Dr. Duarte. The next day I was on a train to Malaga to give a talk at their national meeting. And this was one of the places where we had lunch on the beach there. And their meetings are really great. They start with breakfast, and then in about 3 or 4, it's cocktail hour before the evening lectures. And again, you have a nice long break for lunch, or they provide lunch at the meeting. But we started our discussions about research over this spot. And when we got back to the hospital, I met the entire division and all of the residents. And they had reviewed some articles before that meeting. And we decided on what questions they wanted to answer, what would help them. And they decided on these 4 primary questions with, yes, a little input. But they wanted to address the impact of fluid overload on their patient outcomes. They spent a lot of time giving fluids, hydrating these patients, chasing that fluid with diuretics, as we do here, and then rehydrating them again. And they wanted to know if this impacted outcomes. There had been a paper published a few years earlier out of Texas that found that fluid overload in the bone marrow transplant population is actually a toxicity criteria and impacts mortality greatly. And we have shown that in other patient populations. And there were flaws in that study, and they wanted to try and duplicate those findings. They also had never looked at any of their kidney outcomes. They checked creatinines weekly, but they hadn't really done anything looking at outcomes of AKI, I apologize, as acute kidney injury, and CKD as chronic kidney disease. So they hadn't identified prevalence, risk factors, or does this kidney injury impact outcomes at all? And another question they had was proteinuria and their outcomes. So we routinely in our clinic get urines, and I have demonstrated that protein in the urine in this patient population increases your risk of mortality, non-relapse mortality, by 1 year, about 3 to 4-fold. And they had been checking urines, but when they found protein, they didn't really know what to do with that. And they weren't intervening. And so when I suggested that they start checking urines, given the data we'd published, they were like, well, we're not so sure, because we don't know what to do with that information, and we don't know if it's impacting outcomes. So that was one of the research questions that they wanted to answer as well, before they restarted checking these urines. So we began creating a database and using standard definitions that we have for acute kidney injury, chronic kidney disease, and proteinuria, defined volume overload by percent and fluid overload. And we focused only on the allogeneic transplants and looked from 2009 to 2022. They do probably about 50 to 75 transplants there a year. So in building out this database, we identified about 350 patients. This is all done manually, so there are people that are gathering and building this database. They don't have a data management per se that can pull this data for you. So they're all going back and reviewing the electronic health record and gathering this data. And we decided to get clinical and laboratory data at baseline and then these various time points after transplant and out to 1 year. And these patients do follow up at their center, all of them. They have great basic demographic data. They have data about the conditioning regimen, all the complications, weights, ins and outs, and blood pressures that they do when they're on the inpatient service. And then they have a record of outcomes. And I remember Dr. Duarte saying, we don't have any fancy biomarkers. We don't do that. We don't here, but we do have a very good electronic record that has a lot of really useful information. This database is continuing to be built. It's in the process now of being cleaned, and we continue to meet monthly to discuss the data and projects, and Dr. Ana Bocanegra, who is one of the junior faculty at the hospital, is really taking the lead on this research. And the goal is to try and have 2 abstracts submitted by the fall and winter to national meetings. And the picture on the right, I just really like that tree. I was in Dania, which is a city on the coast, and I thought it was kind of cool, the juxtaposition of a sculpture of a tree next to a tree. Anyway. Okay, so I was invited to give multiple talks while I was there, and I was told that my first talk in Spain at this meeting could be in English. However, the last talk that I was going to give at the end of my time there had to be in Spanish. Okay, so the first talk, thankfully, I gave at this national meeting in Malaga for all the transplant physicians. And I also spoke and did a teaching conference with the adult nephrology group at the hospital, really trying to get them more engaged with these patients. I presented to the pediatric transplant nephrology and ICU teams at one of the children's hospitals, on the outskirts of Madrid, called Hospital La Paz. And I spoke to the nurses on fluids and electrolytes and the importance of daily weights. And Jordan was kind enough to share one of his many lectures on fluid and electrolytes with me via email. That was the talk I had to give in Spanish. It's hard enough trying to give a talk on fluid and electrolytes in English so people understand it, but in Spanish, it was twice as hard. Luckily, I had friends that would help me translate both the slides and during the talk that I was giving in Spanish. We did some journal clubs, and I mentored one of the residents. I'm presenting his journal club. The picture to the right is the residents' graduation. So the residents there, when they graduate, it's not a few-hour thing. They take a whole weekend. They rent a house outside of Madrid. They have a big dinner on a Friday. On Saturday, they have a barbecue, and that's when they invite the faculty to come and spend the day with them. There is someone who cooks this amazing barbecue with the best meats and chimichurri sauce I've ever had. And what was great, too, is that the residents that have graduated and gone through this program, wherever they're practicing throughout Spain, Barcelona, the south of Spain, come back for this weekend. So it's really, once you graduate from here, you continue to be part of the family, and they come back for this. So I'm just going to show you some pictures of the Children's Hospital because I thought you might want to see them. This is the Hospital La Paz, which is part of the Children's Hospital that's attached to a maternity hospital, and they're in the process of really remodeling this space. And what you can see here is on that right upper corner is actually their new ICU. Dr. Zimmerman will appreciate this. It is state-of-the-art. They are so proud of this ICU. It's really quite impressive. They offer ECMO, CRT, plasmapheresis, all the modalities that we have here. And on the bottom right is their dialysis unit. This is where kids with kidney disease come in for their hemodialysis. They also do peritoneal dialysis, and they do about 25 kidney transplants a year in pediatrics as well. And on this left is this monitor that they have, and this is this new state-of-the-art monitor that I got to see, and here it is slightly up close. But the KDIGO, or that pops up, is actually the stage of acute kidney injury that they're in. And they have the list of the drips, the concentration of the drips, the rate that they're going in. They have the fluid balance, the percent fluid overload. All the labs are here. They have a time since the last intervention on the patient is also present. And as you click through this, you can get various different information. There is a live picture of the patient on the screen at all times, so that if anything changes, you can see what happens. If an alarm goes off, the doors to the room automatically open, and the entire ICU is alerted. It's really quite incredible. Thankfully, none of that happened. But I was quite impressed with this technology and wished we had these screens here. So, okay. So we're going to take a little interlude, or we're gonna pause here. And I just wanted to share this picture because I thought it was really cool. This was in Girona when I was visiting with a friend of mine who came to see me from Seattle. And we were exploring some of the old city where there are forts and palaces there, and we came across this. And in case you're not clear exactly what it is, here's another perspective of this, I don't even know what you call it, sculpture. My eldest son, is an aspiring musician and a jazz pianist, so I took a picture of this and sent it to him. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I really hope his career takes off long before this person's did. Anyway, I thought it was pretty cool. So moving on to part 2, because this is a sabbatical in 2 parts, we'll talk a bit about my personal journey. This is a building that is near Plaza Mayor, which is a major plaza, a touristy plaza in Madrid. And if you can appreciate the time on the clock, it is 7:15 p.m. I seem to like that time of day. The lighting was lovely, and I loved the color of the building. So my personal goals for the sabbatical were to figure out what I wanted my third act to be. And I don't know if any of you listen to Jane Fonda or are a fan, but she divides her life or thinks about it in, the first 30 years, then you have years 30 to 60, and then 60, and if you're lucky, out to 90 and beyond. And what are you going to do with those 30 years? Because if you've decided to have children, you've done most of your child rearing, and my boys are off, clearly don't listen. But I wanted to explore what I wanted to do with that time, and what did that look like? I feel like there's more I want to do. I have energy. I wanted to have an impact. And I really wanted to take time while I was there to explore options, to read, to write, and to reflect. A goal was to become fluent in Spanish. I wanted to also learn to let go of things that I can't control. To just let go of inhibitions, and to let go of perhaps the walls that I had put up to protect myself. I had a goal to say yes. When I got over there, I was going to say yes to things. I was going to have new experiences. Whatever I was invited to, I was going to go, and I'd figure it out later. And I also realized that I needed to figure out what brought me joy. I have been doing this a long time. I have always loved what I wanted to do, but it felt like things were changing. And I don't think I was the only one who was feeling this, but for me, I felt like things were changing. I felt like I was in a cycle, and I was starting to internalize negativity and what people were carrying and missing those connections. And so I needed to take a step back and find out what I wanted to do and what brought me joy. I put a lot on this sabbatical, you can tell. So I spent time exploring Spain, the food, the wine, the culture, and the people. I am an avid tennis player and played competitively, so I went to the Madrid Open. I did not get to see Carlos Alcaraz play, unfortunately, but I did see him show up for his warm-up, but got to watch some great tennis. I traveled to Girona and explored the old city, and this is a picture of Girona, and I was told that much of Game of Thrones is actually filmed there. I also explored the coast. Friends of mine had an apartment in Dania, which is along the coast in Javia, and were gracious enough to take me, and we spent a weekend there. So Spain has a lot of culture, and I started to learn about it and try to experience it while I was there. And so, as I said, my apartment is in the heart of the city. And I remember sitting there one evening. There's always noise outside because there's always people doing something. And there was this drum beat. And I was like, I wonder what's going on. So I open the windows and I step out onto my thin little balcony. And it's not a big balcony. It's like the one on the other side. You just can stand there, one person. And I see this. And I was taken aback. And I was actually scared at first. I was like, oh my God, the Spanish KKK is walking down Calle del Prado in the middle of Madrid. This can't be. And then I took a breath and I realized that those hoods were actually purple in color, and that it was followed by a band and a procession. And what this was is the procession for Semana Santa, which is their Holy Week. And it starts the week before Easter Sunday. And these processions were taking place throughout Madrid, but I was not aware of that. So my introduction to Semana Santa. I also went to the bullfights. Now, Dr. Duarte is an avid fan of bullfighting, and he grew up in this culture and handed me a book by Hemingway called Death in the Afternoon, which is all about bullfighting. So he said, if you're going to be here in May, you really should go to a bullfight, because there are bullfights every day almost in May. throughout Spain. And this is Plaza de Toros, where we went to one of the bullfights. And I started reading this book, and on the first page of this book, as I'm reading this, the horse is gored to death. I'm like, the horse dies? There's a horse in a bullfight? And I started asking around, and when you ask people about bullfights, you get opposite. It's a very hot topic. There are people that value it for its cultural and historic perspective. There are industries built around this. It's livelihood for many people. And then there's other people that think it's barbaric and it should be banned. Okay. I also felt like when I talked to some of my friends in Seattle, they couldn't believe I was going to go. I felt judged, but I was like, I'm going to say yes. That's my goal. It's an experience. I should have that experience. And I wasn't going to change the morals of an entire country by sitting at home. So I thought I would go and experience it. So this is the stadium. You can see the bull there. It starts with the introduction. On the far right, they come in as a procession. Those are the matadors, and they're a team of them. And they come in, and it's pageantry. And then the bull comes out, and there is a horse, but the horse is wrapped and now protected, so it doesn't get gored. And there's a gentleman on the horse that starts with the bull and gets him behind the neck with a spear. And then 2 more people come out. So before the matador is really engaged, the bull has been injured. So it's not a fair fight. And I appreciate that it's not a fair fight. And as Dr. Duarte told me, it's never going to be a fair fight because we don't want all the matadors to die. Fine, I understand that. But anyway, I also have to say that I saw 4 of these bullfights and then started to feel nauseated and having shaking chills. And I realized later that I actually had Campylobacter, and that's why I was sick. But I left early from the bullfights for that reason, and it was an experience, and I am glad and thankful for that opportunity. I'm not sure I'll be back anytime soon to a bullfight. I really enjoyed the food there. Shopping takes on a very different feel. I was able to shop at the local markets, and within the market are these little tiendas and stalls where you can buy fresh fish and fresh meat. There is a person who sells only chicken, a person who sells only fish. There are olives. The meat guy has Iberico ham and cheese, and I found my favorite people and would chat with them and get to know them. And it was a very different feel. I could shop for a couple of days of meals rather than planning my meals for the week and doing all my shopping on one day. And you really do get to share stories and recipes with the people that you're buying food from. And I appreciated, again, those connections that I was able to make within my neighborhood. So Spaniards also like their wine. They're not big white wine drinkers, I learned, but they do enjoy their wine and their vermouth. As I said, vermouth is on tap. This was one of the meals we went to in Malaga. There were about 10 of us, in all fairness, drinking those 5 bottles of wine. I don't want to give you the impression that I drank them all alone. But these dinners and meals, they start at 9:30 and they go on for hours over conversation and food and just enjoying the time that they had together. And I remember this was my first night in Malaga. I had just recovered from COVID, and they had a dinner, and it started at 9:30 and went on for about 3 hours. And then what happens after that is they have their gin and tonics for dessert. So after this meal, we went to another bar to have a gin and tonic and ended up closing that place down about 3 a.m. I can't remember the last time I ever closed down a bar, and I was exhausted. I just wanted to go home because we had to be up the next morning at 8 o'clock, and they were all there at the meeting, 8 o'clock, ready to go. I was convinced. I don't think they sleep a lot there. I don't understand it. But anyway, I started to embrace that lifestyle a little bit. though I did not stay out until 3. They have wonderful outdoor markets where you can explore and find anything you need. There's clothes and shoes and antiques and lots of people. This is Rastro, one of the outdoor markets in La Latina neighborhood, and it's every Sunday from about 1 to 4. And it's fun, but packed. No one was wearing a mask. And they love their shoes. Their espadrilles are everywhere, every size, shape, color as well. And on the feet of all women, I learned from spring until about winter there. So, of course, I had to do a little shopping while I was there as well. I think what I valued most about my time there, were the people that I met. They were warm and welcoming, and really, they didn't know me at all. We took a chance on each other, and I found that as well refreshing. They didn't have preconceived notions of me. They didn't have any perceptions, and were really wanting to get to know me. And we spent a lot of time on my conversations in the car on the way to work, over meals, over walks, just really getting to know one another. In the picture on the left are the physicians that I worked with at the hospital. Dr. Ana Bocanegra on the left is the junior faculty member who is taking on the lead on the research projects and doggedly going through all the charts to create this database. Isa Salcedo is the PhD nursing faculty member who works on research within the division and helps to develop the protocols. Dr. Guiomar Bautista is one of the senior attendings. Dr. Rafael Duarte is the division head. And Dr. Carlos de Miguel is one of the junior faculty members who put up with me every Monday and Thursday in his outpatient clinic, nudging him to get a blood pressure and a weight on his patients. In the picture on the right, we were celebrating my birthday in May, and Pablo, who is the gentleman with the glasses, was one of the residents who had just graduated and is starting his new faculty position in London. And on the bottom right are Pilar and Rafa, and I had met them through a mutual friend, but they met me at the airport. They took care of me when I was sick. They were really my family. In Madrid when I was away from my family, and just incredible people. And I hope that these are friends that I will have throughout my third act and beyond. So time flew by way too quickly. 4 months passed in the blink of an eye. And you can see that from the picture. This is my street, again, the view outside my balcony. The first one on the left is when I arrived in March and things were blooming. The second photograph is kind of mid-April. And then at the end, that is the morning that I left to come back, June 26th. It was very hard to leave. And my husband was with me, and he's like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "I love you, but it's just, Madrid is awesome." Anyway, so as I said, time flew by. I learned a lot of things. Just to let you know, I did take flamenco dance classes. I learned, I thought it would help me let go. You know, you're in a room dancing, you should let go. I learned I'm not a very good dancer, but I had fun. I learned to make paella. But what I really learned and found is my old, happy, positive self. I learned that connection is important to me, and what I value. I value the people that I meet, the people that I work with, and it's important, those connections are important to me. And when I felt like I wasn't having them, it did impact the joy I got out of my work. I was energized by the new environment, by my work colleagues and new friends. I sent this picture to some friends, and my husband, because I was so proud of the paella, which was delicious, by the way. And Pilar and Rafa taught me how to make that. And the comments I got back were, "You look so happy. I'm so happy for you that you found this joy and you've been able to have this time." And I looked at the picture and I thought, well, it's just me smiling. And it made me reflect on what was I also putting out there? Like, was I not conveying that? Was it because I wasn't feeling it, or what was it? And I wanted to make sure that I didn't continue to do that because it was important to me not to. And that's what I hope that I can bring back and continue to do here as I continue my work here, for however long that might be. And I also realized that 8 to 3 is a really nice work day. And how can I make that happen and go home and have a nice lunch with a glass of wine and not have to worry? I'm still haven't figured that out yet, but maybe if Dr. Walker Harding is on the phone, she might want to think about how we can do that. So I am grateful for this time and this opportunity and would like to thank the Department of Pediatrics, Dr. Walker Harding, Erin Allen, and Christina Woodruff for supporting the sabbatical and allowing me to apply for that research funding and shepherding me through that process. And Dr. Susan Marshall as well for allowing me to work remotely as co-director of the Fellows College. To my colleagues and friends in the Division of Nephrology, thank you for covering my patients for me and my Epic inbox. That was huge. Emily, who has been my research assistant for 15 years and kept the research projects going that we have and would nudge me, check your email, you have some charts you need to review, even while I was away. The GME office and Boots for taking on that time, for the Fellows College, being there in person when I couldn't be. And Greg Redding has always offered me a space in his office to go into, to sit, to cry, to vent, to talk about family, to talk about things. And if you know Greg Redding, he'll give you advice as only he can and tell you like it is. But always seemed to say the right thing, but I appreciated that space. And of course, my family, my husband and I, Charles, celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary. And this is in the south of the south of Spain, where we had dinner for our 30th anniversary. And those are my children. Zamir was 4 months when I came back to do my fellowship, and my twins, who are now 20, were born when I got my first K award. So they've been on this journey with me, and I couldn't do any of it without them and their support. But do not give a Grand Rounds talk to your 20-year-old son the night before you're going to give it. Not a good idea. So I leave you with this photograph. It's perhaps a sunset on the time I've had here and a sunrise on new beginnings, and that third act, however you like to view it or your perspective, and a quote that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Thank you.
We're almost out of time, but if there's any questions in the room, you can let me know. There's a few comments online, so I'll just read those because I think one of them is one of your friends from Madrid, Pilar Rafa.
Yes.
Says gracias, Sangeeta. And Leslie Walker Harding is online. Thank you so much, Sangeeta, for your insightful talk. What a wonderful experience. And I'm just wondering, in the last 30 seconds, if you can talk about what, if anything, from your experience there or from how they practice there, you can bring here. The 8 to 3 workday is obviously an example, but anything else about what they do that we can bring to our experience here to make our life a little bit more similar to that?
I think they genuinely enjoy what they do, and they genuinely enjoy each other. And I think that's a big part of it. And I think starting that morning with those meetings and then going and getting a cup of coffee together really makes a difference. So if there are those little things that you can do, they don't eat lunch in their offices in front of a computer, right? They make an effort to go have lunch with somebody. Even if you're going to eat in the cafeteria, which the food is cafeteria food, it's okay. You bring somebody with you and you share that meal. So I think those connections are really make a difference. And I think we lost some of that, and we're all so busy and feel like we need to have that pressure. They never felt stressed about anything. They didn't stress. I would ask for labs. They had a patient in the hospital that had acute kidney injury. Urine output was out. Labs were out of whack. And they're texting me, and I'm trying to respond. And I'm like, okay, first thing in the morning, I'm like, okay, how's the patient doing? What are the labs? They're like, we don't have labs back. This is Madrid. I'm like, but it's like 7 a.m. Oh, we'll get him at 10 or 11. I'm like, but your patient's unstable. Hey, he'll be fine. So there was like none of that urgency, none of that pressure. And they were right. He was fine. You know, the labs aren't going to change. Okay.
Thank you so much for this. Thanks everybody for
Thank
being
you.
here. And we'll see you all next week.